Happy New Year. As 2025 begins, I hope you guys have a wonderful year. I hope it's prosperous and joyous in the best ways imaginable. I hope all the good things happen and every single thing that you wanted comes to you. I started my year by watching Kraven the Hunter. Finally watching Kraven the Hunter, which is a movie that honestly for the longest time I'd started to think was not actually about to happen. This had gone through so many delays since it was originally supposed to come out in 2023. I remember it was originally slated to come out around the same time as the Spider-Man 2 game, which also had Kraven the Hunter in it. But then eventually it got delayed because of the SAG-AFTRA and WGA strikes, and then it eventually moved a whole year until it went a little further than that, and now I'm seeing it in the new year, 2025. I went to go see it yesterday with my dad, and to be completely honest with you, after covering a lot of these movies now in the Sony MCU, whatever thing they're calling it, the SUMC, Sony Universe of Marvel characters, that's the full form of that, I came to a point where I started feeling like everything was being repeated. Like, especially with stuff like Morbius and Madam Web, I felt like my comments were sort of going back and forth in terms of I'm saying the same thing over and over again because the issues, there were some that were persistent across both movies. But with Kraven the Hunter, there were a couple of advantages going in. For one, they had said this was R-rated. This is something that a lot of people had wanted for a while, and they really leaned into that, and they said this one's a violent one, so you should show up. There's going to be a huge body count. And it seemed like it was leaning more into, doing some extreme stuff with a character like Kraven the Hunter. And walking out from it, I think what people are probably going to expect is some kind of a massive takedown video. Somewhere where I'm going to just, really go off on the camera saying this movie is the worst thing that's ever been made. But it's not the worst thing ever made. It's a movie that I can honestly say, as low a bar as it is better than Morbius and Madam Web. I prefer the Venom movies over Kraven the Hunter, but I'm not also going to tell you Kraven the Hunter is a particularly good movie. This is a very late video. A lot of people have already talked about this movie, so I'm assuming at this point of time the consensus is known and where things land when it comes to this movie. But the reason I wanted to also do this is because now that the SUMC seems to have culminated of sorts and they've sort of decided to take it, on a break or put it fully on lock because it doesn't seem to be doing super well. Just going back on these movies now, I feel like it comes up to a bigger point, which is, what was the point? Because it doesn't feel like anything of merit has been achieved with these movies. I talked about this a little bit in Venom The Last Dance's review. The fact that there was this sense towards the end of that movie where it was like, what exactly was gained in all of this and how much headway was made in the process. But I think I feel that more so with this entire section of movies because these Sony Marvel adjacent movies based on Spider-Man characters while not having any Spider-Man in them has done nothing for these characters. And it's kind of crazy because watching Kraven the Hunter, you kind of get the same exact feeling. Now, granted, there are things to enjoy in Kraven the Hunter. For example, the action is fun. There are some violent sequences in here, and yes, that body count is extensive at times. And there are some moments that are very enjoyable as a result, and for that, I do give the movie some credit. Those were some entertaining moments in there. I also really liked Aaron Taylor Johnson. I thought he was actually doing a decent job as Kraven. I think he did a lot of work to get the role as good as he could, and he did put a lot of effort in there. And so I do give him a lot of credit to that, and I do give the action some credit as well, especially a couple of moments where, you really got to get some brutal, stuff in terms of killings and all that. Sometimes it cut away from things, which I was a little disappointed by because I thought, well, if you're you're an R-rated movie, go for it. So I would have probably liked to see that, but whatever. But beyond that, with Kraven, I can't think of anything to really latch onto. And that, I think, is a worse thing than some of the other stuff because unlike Morbius, it's not even like an entertainingly not great movie. It's just one of those things that exists and you watch it and then you move on. I saw it yesterday and frankly, I'm already sort of forgetting it as it's going around. And that's kind of the unfortunate thing about this movie. It doesn't have anything extremely impactful past a few things here and there. Some stuff that is funny to look back on. For example, Alessandro Nivola as Alexei Sitsevich, or the Rhino. His performance in this is very over the top and silly. It kind of feels like he's trying to recapture some of Pollock's Troy from Face Off in here, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. There's a couple of points where he does things which I have never seen before. Like, he makes this sound effect when he's told a hit on Kraven fails, and his response to it is this sound, which is so bizarre, and I'm not really sure where that came from, and it happens so randomly. I couldn't help but kind of chuckle over that. It was really, really silly. Also, the CGI with the Rhino is not particularly great. I mean, granted, when you think of live action Rhino, there's not a lot you could do with that premise, but it's not particularly good what they do either. When it comes to some characters who are hinted at, like Calypso's character played by Ariana DeBose, who does nothing in this movie besides be helpful for one thing, which is she has this potion of sorts that has been passed down by her grandmother, and it has this healing capability that can be used to bring someone back. And that is something that Kraven is given when he's a kid, and Sergei is very gravely injured, and that helps him up. And then later on, he spends a long time trying to find her off screen, and eventually he does, and he's like, do you have more? And she eventually does have more. And that's really it. Otherwise, she doesn't really have much to add. I mean, she helps in one other thing that was with another character, but then that leads me to that other character who is absolutely useless in this movie, and that is the Foreigner. He's this guy who is going around to all of these crime scenes where Kraven has been and trying to lure him of sorts, and he's working with the Rhino, and it seems like he's got some kind of an angle on how to play this out, but he does these things where he will stop time of sorts, like hypnotize somebody and say 1, 2, 3, and he would then suddenly just move past a certain, spot and be able to completely, bamboozle the guy who he was just trying to outrun. So he would be able to take out his targets. But he doesn't add anything to the movie. He is not relevant to the narrative at all. He has nothing of value to add to this entire story unfolding. You could take him out of the movie and it changes absolutely nothing about the movie, except for the one thing where he sometimes is able to, launch these hallucinations, like he manages to synthesize this kind of dart towards Kraven, and at one point he launches it at Kraven and it exposes Kraven's worst fear, and that fear, drumroll, happens to be spiders, which is just kind of funny because, of course, Spider-Man's not in these movies, so the fact that spiders is his biggest fear is something that could have been even more interesting if you had Spider-Man in there. It sort of made me think, actually. It was like, well, what could give him some fear? What if Spider-Man showed up right now and he was the villain he had to face? And imagine a man with spider powers has to take on Kraven the Hunter. He would have more of a motivation to go after that, and there'd be something over there, but there'd be some fear. None of that really does come to fruition. It's a very missed opportunity. There's also not much to gain from the other characters who are very important in Sergei's life. For example, his brother Dmitri. He has a lot of very unsubtle setups to the fact that he's the chameleon. Like, this is something that, of course, you probably have some knowledge of if you've, read comics and stuff, so you kind of have some kind of, backing into that. But at the same time, the movie goes out of its way to foreshadow the fact that he's the chameleon. Like, every now and then there'll be a character who's like, he can change his voices. He's really good at that. And one time, Russell Crowe, Nikolai, his father, actually says that my son is amazing, right? He's playing the piano. He's like chameleon. It's like, oh, interesting. Like, it's just really beating you over the head that this is someone who can do all of those things. As for the Russell Crowe, I don't know what he was up to in this movie. He's either having too much fun with this material or not having any fun with it at all. I mean, I have to give him some props to the fact that he does kind of ham it up pretty often with this really heavy Russian accent that he has throughout the movie, and he tries to use it in funny ways, You know, sometimes when the movie goes into those moments, I wish it did a lot more of that, and it just doesn't happen. It actually feels kind of timely to talk about this movie right now, because like a week ago, I think there was an article from the Sony Pictures CEO saying that the movies are not doing well and that people were to blame, specifically press and critics, for trashing the movies that were actually pretty good. Now, here's the thing. There are movies that exist out there which are critical disasters, ended up making $1 billion at the box office. This can happen. Because if there's an interest from audiences to go check out certain things, they will go check out certain things. Unfortunately for these movies, even the audiences don't really seem to be loving them. The only ones anyone had any investment in were the Venom movies. The first one especially did very, very well, but then the subsequent two movies did well, not quite as well as those first one did. But at the same time, there was a fan base to that because Venom was a recognizable character and people really liked Venom. With Morbius, Madam Web, and now Kraven, people are not responding to these movies because they're just very inherently flawed and messy movies. You're just not putting the amount of love and care into them as there could be. Say what you will about the Venom movies, Tom Hardy is genuinely giving some, effort to playing this character. Eddie Brock and Venom, that relationship the two of them have is very well showcased. That's something that it utilizes to its full potential. You don't really get that with these other movies. These are very forgettable things, and these are things that just sort of pass you by as it goes on. So as much as I want to credit these movies a little bit more for trying something, they don't. And unfortunately, they just kind of exist in this bubble now where they've really achieved absolutely nothing with this entire section of the Marvel movies that are going on right now. And so it just kind of feels like they're there. It's kind of unfortunate, but that's the case. And so I walked out of Kraven the Hunter thinking that was just another mediocre movie. I know some people really want ratings, so I guess I'll give you one. I would have probably given this a 5 out of 10. So hopefully, the year is uphill from here. And thank you so much as always for watching. It means a lot to me, and let's usher in the new year together. As always, if you like this, please do subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the movies.